Hello, good morning. Give me a thumbs up if Dan or Sam, if you can hear me speaking. Good. Okay, great. So we're going to get started. Because we're working with farmers, we're having a little bit of problem getting them out of their fields and onto a stable Wi-Fi, but no problem. We'll get going and make sure, hopefully, our speakers will be with us soon. Oh, I think that's Jeremy popping in. So anyone, we know we've got a lot of sign-ups. Anyone who's late or wants to watch it back, we're going to send out an email afterwards and have the webinar up on the website. So I'm Katie. I'm the CEO here at Re-Genus, and I'm going to be walking you through and introducing the speakers and helping facilitate a discussion today. Everyone who's watching is muted, and but we really want to have your questions and comments in the Q&A. So we'll leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A, but as you think about questions, just pop them into the box. We'll hopefully get through to all of them, but if not, we'll email out some more Q&A afterwards. So a quick intro to me before we get going, just to give Jeremy a little bit of time also to get up and running. So I'm CEO here at Re-Genus. I joined from another company called Nature Metrics, where we monitored nature using DNA. And I'm also on the board of a company called Earth Blocks that does geospatial monitoring. And the reason why that's, I think, interesting is that I spent many years trying to get data, as many sort of hundreds of other companies are doing, to try and get and deliver data to corporates, to supply chains, to banks and to farmers, to really understand Scope 3 emissions, ESG data, sustainability data. But towards the end of my time at Nature Metrics, it got me thinking, if there's so many companies being funded to deliver data, who's actually delivering the change on the ground that's going to make that data different? Who's actually doing the work in the real assets to change the Scope 3 emissions, to change the biodiversity, to stop the amount of nitrogen leaching into the waterways, and to actually make things better? And when I started to look around, seemed like there was a lot more money and time and resource going into data collection than there was into the real assets and the real businesses that were making change. And then you look, well, which sector really has the biggest impact and that has the biggest potential for change? And agriculture is more than a third of the land use in the world, and agriculture and forests together are 2/3. And not only do these sectors have great potential for impact on nature, they also are completely reliant on nature. And so it felt like a really good place to start. The other thing, when I was using DNA to monitor things like soils and water, is the insight that there is so much life that has such a huge impact on us and keeps us alive, keeps the nutrient cycling, keeps the carbon cycling, moderates our immune systems, the immune system and the sort of disease resilience of crops and trees and everything. But you can't see it. You can only see it when you look at the molecular level. And so up until very recently, our whole system, including our farming system, has been built to completely ignore all of this life that's absolutely vital. And when you look at modern farming, it's really been built to get rid of life other than the life, the crop or the plant that you want. And we now know that that's just a really bad way to manage things if you want nature to help you and support you. And particularly now with the impacts of climate change and nature loss, starting to bite the farming system, leaning into nature, working with nature and understand how to bring that resilience back is super important. So that's why I'm here. And what we want to explore today is a little bit more about why that microbiome is important, how people are bringing it back, and what impact that's actually having on real farming systems. So very cool to have 4 people with us today. Hopefully, we can't see Jeremy, but I know he's there.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can absolutely hear you. Yeah. So
right. Apologies. I'm just trying to figure out my camera, but I am here. And
no
this
problem.
is well, I've got a face for radio, so honestly, this is probably better.
Well, I think we can't see you, but we can hear you really well, and we can see Andy, but maybe we can't hear him so well. So between you, it's perfect.
I will figure this out.
No problem, no problem. You still got time. We're going to go to the Re-Genus team first. So we've got Dan, who's our founder, and Sam, who's our lovely agronomist, who's working with farmers around the country to run our trials and to look at how the product's working and how farming systems are working with nature. And also somehow in his spare time is finding time to do a Nuffield farming scholarship on peat-free alternatives and composting for nutrient density in the horti sector. So we'll try and pick up on that as well. But maybe first I'll go to Dan. So maybe you can just give us a little bit of background about how on earth you sort of got to the point where you're putting natural fungal microbiomes into agricultural fields.
Morning, thank you. It is a really very specific problem, and it does go back to, I bought a woodland back in 2018, and as part of the woodland management, it was a bit old and falling over. We decided to do a clear fell where you need to take all the trees out and start again and restructure it. So we did that, but with a family history in growing plants, I thought it'd be a really nice thing to do with the family to grow my own trees for my own woodland with my family. So we attended site, we collected some seeds, we grew our own trees using the Elapot paper pot system, just with normal nursery grade growing media. And they were all nice and green, planted them in the woodland a year later after the operators had left, and all the trees went really yellow, really sick, and looked like they were all going to die. And the forester said, that's normal. You've grown them in a nursery with synthetic fertilizers, and you've planted them out where it's fungi and bacteria. But don't worry, in 2 years, they'll find their feet and start growing. I mean, ultimately, they did get going that year and grew really well, but it was a problem that I wanted to try and fix, which is this nature gap of growing things with chemicals when actually it's fungi and bacteria that they want to do their nutrient exchange and symbiotic relationship with. So over the next few years, with the support from the Welsh Government, Scottish Government, we created a tree nursery in the middle of that woodland, which is now up and running in Pembrokeshire. And the Forestry Commission created a grant system called the Tree Production Innovation Fund. And the concept was, is it possible to mimic woodland soil, bring it into the tree nursery, grow the tree, so when you plant it out, then the tree doesn't have this nature gap. And as part of that project, what we actually found out when we were testing a lot of fields where trees were ultimately getting planted, when you look at the soil under the microscope, there was lots of bacteria, but there was no fungi, there was no nutrient cycling microbes, and there was no nematodes. So for us, it was an even bigger problem, which is there's no fungi in the soil sufficient to transition the trees. And that's why they're struggling. That's why they have this nature gap. So we started talking about this online, on LinkedIn, talking about how we'd created fungi, how we were growing trees without synthetic fertilizer, we were growing trees with fungi and bacteria, a natural source of nutrition. And that exchange where the tree is giving up its sugars via the root exudates and it's doing an exchange for the enzymes with the fungi and bacteria, we were able to demonstrate you can grow trees without synthetic fertilizer. So using that approach, the likes of Andy at Dunthrop and Jeremy at Eves Hill, who were regenerative farmers, came to us and said, well, if you've worked out how to create fungi, how can you help then create that in the field environment? So working with our suppliers, Land Energy, we effectively took our growing media, which was alive, and we pelleted it. And then we started doing trials with our early adopters, applying it onto farms, applying it into composts, and seeing if we could improve soil. So I think this is probably the bit where I'm now going to hand over to Sam. But the concept is very, very narrow, but actually is quite wide in its application. If you want to grow any plant without synthetic fertilizer, you need fungi, because most often in soils, that's what's missing. And that's the complexity of both the nutrition and with the exchange with the plants.
Fab, thank you. So we've been on a kind of like wild roller coaster ride so far, from tree nurseries to agriculture. So maybe Sam, as our resident agronomist, you can explain in a little bit more detail what our sort of product system is and why you joined, in terms of, you know, what's exciting about the fungi and the natural nutrition.
Sure. Morning, everyone. So yeah, picking up from Daniel, basically the concept is the same. Whatever you're growing, you want photosynthesis, sugars down into the soil, and then plants pushing out those roots exudates and feeding the soil, feeding the microbiome, which are then exchanging nutrients for sugar, essentially. But what we found in historically, intensively farmed agricultural soils is that biology has been eroded and is no longer present, because when you use a lot of synthetic fertilizer, that kind of symbiotic relationship essentially collapses. So the plants can get easy nutrition from soluble nitrogen, and then they don't build those associations. Much like Daniel was saying, with the trees grown in the nursery, that's exactly what happened. In the real world, you find that they haven't got that kind of resilience. So then when they're put out in the soil and told to fend for themselves, they really struggle. And farming is a similar system. It's just a shorter time frame, obviously. So what we've basically done is taken that concept of the woodland or living soil that's fungally rich, and tried to work out how we transplant that into agricultural soils in a kind of scaled up and cost effective way. And obviously there's a lot of farmers who are becoming quite interested in biological farming. Some are doing, both of the guys on here today are doing work with their own compost and Johnson Sue and things like that. But it is to create that biology in a consistent and balanced way is quite complicated. It takes quite a lot of attention to detail, microscopy, building your data, checking everything. That is another kind of work stream that farmers, I think, struggle to program into their day. They've already got a lot going on. They've got to be accountants, meteorologists, machinery fixers, and kind of adding compost maker onto that is quite tricky. So what we're trying to do is fit into that, kind of solve that problem and say, okay, we want to have healthier, more biologically active soils, which can lead to healthier plants, better soil structure, hopefully more nutrient dense plants. We'll probably come on to that later, but also reduced synthetic inputs. Those are all the kind of advantages that we're trying to tick off, but do that in a way that's kind of quick and convenient in many ways. So that's how we arrived at basically making a pellet. So the first stream of work when Daniel was developing the business was essentially trying to work out how you can get to the point of making consistent fungally dominated compost. And that went through quite a lot of iterations and funding from the tree production fund and things like that. And then the next stage was, okay, how do we scale beyond the few windrows we have in our woodland in Wales? And essentially the answer is you take a portion of our mother or high quality compost, inoculate that into bark fines. Then we also balance the nutrition. So we're actually adding food and then trace minerals, microelements, in order to kind of give a balance. I have a dog. To basically make a complete package that then we send up to a parenting plant working with land energy, turn that into basically an 8 mil pellet that you can then spread onto the land at a low rate of about 60 kilograms a hectare. And that you can think of as a kind of a biological cheat code or an inoculant. And essentially what that does, you can either incorporate it at the time of establishment with the crop, you can go through the drill, or you can spread it on top by surface broadcast. That breaks down, and that puts the biology back into the soils. And then we have a second pellet, which is essentially, sometimes I think of it as, explain it as, when you talk about fire, what you need for fuel, you need an ignition source, you need fuel, and you need oxygen. So to establish a successful microbiome that's going to kind of, I suppose, remain constant rather than kind of falter, you've got to then feed that microbiome. So we then developed a second pellet, which is same delivery method, same size, same manufacture process, but it's biology free, and it's essentially designed to supply some organic matter and then food for the microbiome. And then that gets processed by the microbes, mineralized, and you kind of get that virtuous circle of plants working with microbes for healthier soil and healthy plant. Hopefully that explains things without going on too long.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. We're going to come back in a little minute to talk about some of the potential benefits of fungi and natural nutrition and natural nutrient cycling. But I wanted to make sure we introduced our two external speakers, Jeremy and Andrew. So maybe, Andy, if we start with you, do you want to just introduce yourself and your the farm that you work with, and sort of, what's your why are you here? What's your key objective in terms of moving to regenerative farming?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose first of all, I'll just double check that you can actually go. You can hear me, because I know there were a few problems beforehand with connection and stuff.
Yeah, we're all good.
Perfect. So I sort of started working with Dunsford Farms about 4 or 5 years ago. As a farm manager, working with a guy called Tim Coates, who was trying to undertake quite a radical transition into regenerative agriculture, with lots of challenges that come with it. And I think, to jump to the point that that Daniel and I originally had a discussion about probably 18 months, 2 years ago, we noticed quite quickly that when we were looking at reducing inputs, our fungal bacterial ratios were a point that we picked up on quite quickly, were just massively out of sync. So we were constantly asking ourselves this question of, how do we reintroduce fungal populations? That's quite a tricky thing to do. The obvious answer is very high quality compost. But I think, as Sam has alluded to, making really good quality compost is a really, it's a hard thing to learn how to do. And it takes you quite a lot of time, I think, is our experience. So whilst we're on that journey of learning how to do compost in our system, we were really looking for, I suppose, a shortcut to allow us to start introducing fungal populations into the soil. So that's really what brings us here.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. And then Jeremy, I can't see you, but I hope you're still there.
I'm still here, Katie. Yes.
Brilliant.
Let's pretend this radio at my end. I've given you some red shimmer. I'm just going to move over to a bit of shimmer this morning. Yeah. So listen, we're at Eves Hill Farm in Norfolk, and we've been on our regenerative transition journey for about 6 to 7 years now. We're a small family farm, and our drivers are multiple, basically. I came back to the farm 10 years ago, saw the way that things were going here. Inputs were only going in one direction regarding price. Our soil quality and health was going in the opposite direction, so we needed to make changes, basically. So we started looking at different regenerative management and practices. And we're a mixed farm, basically. So we've got livestock and arable on the farm. And we started reducing inputs, synthetic fertilizers, chemical fertilizers. And gradually we started seeing some changes. Obviously, we experienced some yield drop off. But I came across Daniel just online, and he just ticked all the boxes that the next stage that we wanted to go to. We'd experimented with bokashi, we'd experimented a lot with IBC, like Andrew said. We were aware of the benefits of compost, and we wanted to fast track that. And Andrew highlighted the difficulties of making really high quality compost. We'd made IBC, Johnson Sioux compost, we'd made seed drenchers, we'd made all sorts of things like that, but it was time consuming. So Daniel's products just seemed to tick the boxes, and we just wanted to create a partnership with you guys and see where that would take us, to be honest with you. And happily, we're happy with the direction it's going in. After 2 years of working with you guys, we're starting to see results from the soil test that we made.
Fab. Okay. I mean, maybe do you want to expand on that a little bit? Like, what does success look like for you on your farm? Is it all about yield? Is it about soil health? Is it what what are you looking for when you're?
No, I mean, our drivers are not yield. We're definitely not. Yield is not a driver for us. It's basically a very holistic approach. So it is, the return of biodiversity is a huge thing. The return of different bird species that we've noticed, over the last 6 years is phenomenal. And that starts from the soil upwards. That starts from what's in the soil, what plants are growing, what biology we've got in the soil. So, even prior to teaming up with you guys, we were seeing that. And that is just, I believe, being fast-tracked by introducing the fungal products that we have via you guys. And then it's the soil testing. It's actually putting soil under a microscope and seeing the difference from 5 years ago to now. I did a Microsoft workshop a couple of months ago, and we took some soil that had the Re-Genus products on it, and it was literally night and day, the difference from a few years ago. It was literally, it was my first Microsoft workshop, so anecdotally, for a while I saw nothing, but then someone showed me how to use the microscope, and then I just saw this, like, as an analogy, it was like watching a bull's semen on a screen. If you've ever performed fertility tests with bulls and you get the semen on a slide, it is literally like Guinness swirling all over the place. And this was the same. The amount of biology that was in our soil samples was similar to bull semen.
I love that, Jeremy.
Often my investors say to me, what does success look like? And if I can just say, looking like bull semen, then that's brilliant.
Well, you can imagine how much the semen of a fertile bull moves around.
Excellent. Well, I think everyone's got a good picture in their head now of what the soil looks like.
But I think it's a really important couple of points there. So one of the things that we'd done as part of the grant work in phase 1 was, what does good compost look like and how do you make it? So we looked at hot composting, we looked at vermicomposting, we looked at Johnson-Su bioreactors, and we looked at organic kind of composting with good chip, and then we looked at different sources of materials. Was it a straw? Was it a hay? Was it a hemp? Was it cacao shells? Was it and then we did a lot of microscopy, nutrition analysis. But actually, one of the things we were really lucky to do was do DNA analysis with Ferroscience up in York. And we were able to see both richness, diversity as the outcomes, but also the complexity in the communities and how diverse it was. And you could start to see a pattern between how you made the compost, what ingredients you had, and where you made it as to the complexity of the microbiome. So if you make hot compost, you only really get microbes that can suffer the heat from the hot compost. And because you turn it over all the time, you only actually benefit the bacteria, not the fungi, who like to be, left alone for long periods of time. The thing with the worms is they break down the organic matter, but they're not very complex. And again, it doesn't work with the fungi. And the Johnson-Su actually does make a difference in terms of the complexity for the fungi, because it's left there and it's static and it's cool. But then it becomes, what was the nutrition you gave it? What was the environment? How much oxygen? Was it in a damp area? Was it, how moist was it? And all of these things are the things that we found that influences the complexity of fungi. And even that we did the same ratios of greens and browns in our Johnson-Sus, we had totally different communities based on what we fed them in terms of the feedstocks. So whilst we speak to lots of farmers and they want to make compost, the bit that gets hard is that there's lots of nuances of you are what you eat. You're only going to get microbes that are based on what you feed them. So if you feed them green waste compost, you're going to get soap loving microbes and hot loving microbes because of how you've created it. But if you use a real complex mix of greens and browns and carbons and nitrogens and all these good practices with a bit of money being spent to understand all of that data, that's where we've done. And I think one of the things that I just wanted to point out is, I think within our compost we have 1 million spores per gram. And when we apply 60 kilos to a field, it actually turns out to be 60 billion spores of fungi per hectare. So some of it is about complexity, which is, 1,000 phylum of fungi, 380 species, and that's just like 25% of what is known. But it's also the abundance. But I think if you take the analogy of compost or a cake. You're taking its home, you're taking its food, you're taking its friends, you're taking its structure with it the whole way. And I think that's the important thing to think about. We're not saying it's our microbes or it's our food, it's the whole system. And I think for Andy and Jeremy, the use of the pellets fits into maybe inoculating on-site compost as well. So compost and making fungi compost is super, super, super hard, but actually it is possible to make on-farm compost and make it better, which I think is what Andy and Jeremy are both doing.
Yeah, thank you. It's actually one of the reasons why I love working with farmers, and particularly regen farmers, is it's just very joyful to hear someone that runs their own business and can say that one of the outcomes they want to see is just more birds. It's actually very rare when people are in corporates and that kind of thing to be able to just celebrate the fact that they're doing something really great for nature without there being a worry about the bottom line or the business case or anything like that. But I know that farmers are under like real pressure, Andy, from a business case margin perspective. So can you talk a little bit more about how you see regen farming from a kind of business commercial perspective? And like, is this something you do just to see birds come back, or do you think it's a sort of commercial proposition as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because we get a lot of comments like this, is sort of we're seeing more butterflies and insects and birds on farm, and I view those slightly sort of, there's a risk of taking comments like that a little bit too flippantly, because what you're seeing there directly is natural capital, and what we are trying to preserve is natural capital, and that really starts as a farmer with our soils. So they're my largest asset on farm, so I want to protect those. But what feeds off those soils is insects and birds. So the more birds and insects I'm seeing are a good indicator that my soils are doing better. So all these things are interlinked, which is really important. But I suppose to go back to your slightly more commercial question, and it goes back, I think, to the question of what's a priority? Is it yield? And I think just firstly to acknowledge, like, after a couple of really hard years for farmers, it's a bit tricky to sit here and say yield doesn't matter. Because when you look at your bottom line after a very dry year last year, and it was really difficult. It's hard to say that yield doesn't matter, because it does to a degree. But I think I go back to the constant refrain, which is it's really about gross margin. We were sitting here probably 3-4 years ago with nitrogen prices at £1,000 a ton or close to. That reality will come back, and dealing with that reality is pretty hard. And that's what really struck me, is that we need to find a way of farming without those artificial inputs, because they're pure cost. A lot of the inputs that we're talking about here, biological inputs, come at a cost, but they provide an awful lot of secondary benefits. And I think that kind of explains our direction, which is we're trying to build positives back into the system and trying to take away negatives.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. Just on that, because I think it's worth, one of the lovely things about getting rid of synthetics is that it's kind of like a crucible for so many problems in so many ways. So I don't know, maybe Dan or Sam, you can take this, or you can tag team. Could you talk a little bit more about like what are the other sort of co-benefits we get when you reduce synthetics and start moving to a more nature-based system? Sam, do you want to start?
Yeah. Well, look, I think when you start working with biology, you can let them start to do the heavy lifting for you. And the nice thing about it is there's a continuation to the kind of assistance that you don't get from using a lot of synthetics. You put on your ammonium nitrate and whatnot, and you lose kind of 50+% of it straight away almost. It either leaches down through the profile because it's not held by the kind of, because it's an anion, or it leaches up into the atmosphere causing pollution. So there's negative externalities to using fertilizer that impact you off farm equally. When you're putting on half of it, you're actually not getting much use out of the other half at all. So, but when you establish a functioning microbiome, they start to build up and repay, 5-10-fold, and it gets better over the years. So actually, when you give nature the space to work for you on your farm, there's a lot of anxiety around J curves and things like that, and I drop off in when you transition to regen. But I think quite a lot of people have figured that out now. You need a much more attention to detail, but actually, when you start kind of having the soil biology and looking at it as a living system, it's not dirt, it's a whole complex web of, well, it's called the soil food web. So once you start to recognize the life that's in that, it will repay you kind of the faith you put in it, I suppose, in some ways, in that you can break down your residues, it can release nutrients, and it can give you better soil structure. It can hold more water. Biology is the driver of organic matter, and I think when you look at what makes a great soil, it's humus and organic matter. Those are your kind of key metrics, and it's well established that using biology builds those things. And actually the opposite happens when you put on synthetics. So if you're doing excessive tillage and then putting on nitrogen, you're oxidizing and you're burning off that organic matter. And you're kind of, in some ways, it's the difference between going backwards each year by using synthetics or forward and up along the progressive curve, which is, yes, Andy and Jeremy have both spoken about it. It's not necessarily yield driven, it's looking at the margins. So, but I don't think a regenerative farm is less productive actually when you're doing it right. And that's, there's plenty of people out there that are proving that now.
Cool.
But yeah, that's kind of my summary of how that biology pays you back once you start giving it the space to do that for you.
Dan, I'm going to come back to you because I noticed Jeremy's got his hand up, but we can only see your glitter. So, and maybe Jeremy, you could also talk about what specifically the work you're going to do with water companies as well for that benefit, but and whatever else you wanted to say.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. That's exactly the point that I wanted to raise. But before I do that, I just wanted to, just talk about the benefits of moving away from these chemicals, the synthetics, because, we've talked about profit, not yield not being our driver here at Eves Hill Farm, but we're driven by community and the effect that we have as a farm on our community and basically providing nutrient dense food for our community. And it's just not the food that we provide them, it's the air quality, it's the water quality, it's all of these holistic things that we can do as farmers for our community. And that's actually what drives us more than anything, actually, because we reap the benefit of our community supporting us as a diverse farming business. And this is what I encourage all farmers and farms to do, is to become more diverse. Diversity is absolutely key. We know this in regenerative farming, regenerative systems. Diversity is absolutely crucial, and that doesn't stop in the field. That is your business, that is your community, that is the people you surround yourselves with. So what we're doing here is taking the community with us by positive farming management and practices. And our local water board has recognised that, and I was absolutely delighted to be able to introduce Anglian Water to you guys so that we can work together. And that happens by Anglian Water kindly give me the funds to use your products, and we take this journey further and we can move more rapidly along to find out the benefits of working together. Thank you.
Yes, brilliant. Thanks, Jeremy. Go on, Dan.
I was just going to try and cover the technical part of, what we're doing. So synthetic fertilizer is effectively just plant soluble and really free for the plant. But that solubility means that there's the off-gassing, so they kind of coat it in inhibitors, and that's where the new recent legislation came in, but it just slows down the point at which it off-gasses an ammonia off-gas or nitrous oxide, or becomes soluble and goes down the river. And why are we different, and what is the technical part of it? So we use lots of different sources of nutrition from nature, so whether it be seaweed, fish, feather meal, poultry meal, meat and bone meal, wood fibre, all of these can be broken down, but in their original state in which we provide them, they are both organic, because this is an organic approved farming fertilizer by the Soil Association, but it's also organic in form. And what happens is the microbes break it down. So if it's really simple food like blood meal, bacteria can get hold of it and they can make it soluble relatively quickly. But if it's like a bone meal, then that's the fungi, and they kind of create these complex chains and proteins to be able to take it away from the bacteria for themselves and to also be able to get it to the plant in complex form. So we achieve slow release fertilizer and reducing the leaching and reducing the off-gassing by effectively the microbes break down the organic sources of nutrition because it takes different lengths of time to do fish and seaweed and poultry meal to be able to give to the plant. So slow release is by definition of it this complex blend, but also when it rains, unless it physically goes down the river, it still stays in organic form and it's not in that enzyme place. So the work we're doing with Jeremy is exactly that, which is looking at the field drains, nitrates in the water, and from a water company perspective, they absolutely don't want nitrates in the water where they then have to take it out. So they're trying to come up the system to make sure that nitrates are, left on farm. So whilst it is the natural mechanism, the externality of improved water courses, improved air quality. I mean, they're things that the UK government have got in legislation, and we're suffering and not meeting that. So it's actually, part of society is a really good positive thing. I think the other thing by doing this microbiome complex nutrition is, and it's something that we've talked about with both of our farmers, is about health of the crop and how much nutrition we can get into the crop, because everyone wants healthier food as well as a healthier environment.
So on that point, going back to Andy, we talk a lot about the fact that we've got all these other benefits, carbon benefits from getting rid of synthetics, which are huge. It's like many tons of CO2 per ton of nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen you don't apply, water benefits, biodiversity benefits. But have you guys done any work at Dunthrop in terms of how you can sort of access these sort of public benefits that you create, whether that's carbon, biodiversity credits, all those kind of things? And do you think it's possible for farmers to get off synthetics without being able to sort of get the value from those public goods as well? Do you think it sort of washes its face on its own? And you don't have to say yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's two quite big issues there, which is you're talking about sort of externalized schemes for carbon and biodiversity, which are complicated and challenging at the best of times to get access to. So you certainly can get into carbon schemes with various actors. That is certainly possible. Does it fill the gap if you're dropping, say, all of your fertilizer away? I wouldn't have thought so, no. But I think it's important to note that when farmers are tackling these issues, it's not all or nothing. You don't need to cut your nitrogen from 220 kilos a hectare on your wheat down to zero in one hit. In fact, you would see quite a shocking outcome from that. But the trick here is about being on the right directional pathway. So if you've cut 20% out of that, you've made a significant move in the right direction. And also you're proving to yourself that you can do that and see potential benefits from it, whether that's a cost saving or an improvement in nitrogen utilization efficiency or whatever. So it's really about taking a step, and wherever you are is making sure you know what your next step is, because I think that's the most important thing behaviorally, is that people are trying and people are making movements in the right direction.
Brilliant.
I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, yeah, it's a really good answer and a segue into the next bit. So I'm just going to say Maya has opened up our Q&A. There's a couple of really good Q&A already, and I'm going to come to the Q&A next. So anyone that has got burning questions that they want to ask or comments, or please do feel free to put them in the Q&A. But yes, I was going to ask a little bit about maybe this goes back to Dan, because we were just talking about that sort of, you don't have to go, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So I wanted to ask a little bit about the trial results that we'd seen this year, and whether, it's possible, isn't it, to be able to do a sort of hybrid system and move slowly towards, as well as to add value to an organic system where the sources of nitrogen are few and far between. So I don't know if Dan or Sam wants to talk a little bit about that, the sort of what results have we seen so far, and is it possible to sort of transition more slowly, like Andy was talking about?
Well, cover our first farmer, Hugh Lothian, and maybe Sam can cover off a farmer who did a hybrid and looked at farm economics. So the first farmer that we worked on was a farmer up in Cumbria, and he did a tram line just because he thought it was a great idea. And we inoculated the tram line in the April, and he'd done a winter sow of some barley, and then we compared it to the rest of the field. And from a farming system, he did the crop, he did the year, and then he went back to his conventional. And the following year, he could see a difference with the oilseed rape, that they'd come up in winter a lot higher. He could see a difference in the amount of flowers and the length of time that they'd had. And over the horizon, he could see there was a change. And when we looked at the soil microscopy, there was still way more fungi on the tram line where we'd applied it versus the other one. And within his system, he had used glyphosate. He had done some Mentil and he'd done some rotation. So for me, whilst we're not going to advocate going back to, practices that we know are bad for soil, I think the point is that when you put life back into the soil, you feed it, it does improve for at least that 1-2 year period for the data that we've got. And I think there is more resilience here by just saying it's all biological or it's all synthetic. We're absolutely seeing people doing hybrids, and we're absolutely seeing benefits from that hybrid. And I think some people like Andy are on a journey where they're reducing it more and more and more. And then we've got others that are just switching over and bringing their soils up to speed and then feeding. And certainly with the organic. And I think there's another point here is, a lot of organic farmers think that their soils are alive, but unless you look at it under a microscope, you don't know. So we've done a few organic farms where they're just as dead as a traditional highly intensive farm system. So I think there's an assumption that organic farming means that there's life in the soil, but when you have such a reduction in insect litter, as an example, insect litter is full of chitin, fungi cell walls are full of chitin. There could easily be a correlation between insect litter or carbon in the soils as to the fungi biomass, and it's not just about practice. But if I hand over to Sam for the estate where we did hybrid.
Yeah, I think it was a point I was going to raise. We've probably harped on a little bit about the evils of synthetic fertilizer, but we totally recognise the real world and not going cold turkey, because there's kind of economics and mindset barriers to that. So we've worked with people who have done, this customer or client that we worked with, he did basically 3 strips or 5 hectare blocks where he was growing winter wheat. So what the farm standard got 200 kilos of nitrogen, and then that was just standard farm protocol. They don't use insecticides, but there is a bit of kind of fungicide, etc. used. And then on the other side, we used the hybrid. So that was basically 95 kilos of N a hectare. 60 of that coming from synthetic, and about the balance, so 35 and a bit from us. And then we did full Re-Genus protocol, which was basically 2 pellets that we've spoke about already, taking it to 70 kilos a hectare of nitrogen. Well, there's no prize for the best yield. That was the full synthetic. But we found, in terms of the farm economics and if you talk about nitrogen use efficiency or partial nutrient balance, the best result was actually on the the hybrid outcome. So where you've got kind of, you're reducing your, I suppose, detrimental inputs a little bit, and then putting some biology in, and then basically they work together. So you're getting some ways, I mean, the pellet's not free, but once you've put the pellet on, you've got free help from the microbes in the soil, and then that works with some of the plant available synthetics coming in to top that up. And that gave, a good result that actually performed the best in terms of return, and also the use of the nitrogen. We talked about when you use full synthetic protocol, you lose a lot of it. And so we're hoping to, because we're in our sort of second and third year with some farmers this year, and we'll keep working and doing sort of longer term trials, and we're hoping to show therefore that we can over time build the microbiome back up. Nitrogen usage efficiency gets more and more each year, and that gradually then the amount of N that you need to put on comes down. And so that's something that's still like a work in progress to be able to demonstrate. So I want to go to a couple of the questions that we've had in the Q&A. So from Martin Hollins, what have you thought about trialing seaweed as part of the second pellet mix? And lots of interesting data on biostimulants. So maybe Daniel could answer that one.
Yeah, when we started doing the tree growing trials, we did different blends. So we just did organic matter and some nutrition. We did peat-free growing media. We did compost and nutrition, or compost for the biology, organic matter and nutrition, different composts. And we could absolutely see a difference between
Oops. I think we just lost Dan. Oh. Yeah, go on. You know what he's going to say.
Oh, am I back?
Sorry. Yeah. You're back. Go on. we got to.
Sort
we've absolutely seen
in the trials.
Yeah.
We've seen differences in the trials based on how complex the system is and how much the plant grew. So for us, the more nutrition that we put in, the more complex, the better we found the growth and the ability for the plant to resist pests and diseases. So our first grills had 7 ingredients, but by the time we finished, we ended up with about 20 ingredients, because each microbe community will want different things at different points of the year, and they want to be able to break down sources of nutrition, and they all like different things. So, if you feed a Mars bar to yourself all day, every day, you're just not going to be very well. And it's the same thing with microbes. So, the slow release fertilizer analogy is also about feeding different microbes the different things that they like. And the more we look at the DNA, the more we see you are what you eat. So for us, whilst I absolutely can see a hypothesis that a biostimulant from seaweed will work, for me, it has to have all of it in there, both from the solubility and mineralization rates to make sure it's not a flash bang, but also for different microbes. So I know we talked about community with Jeremy and diversity with Andy. It really means a lot when you say diversity. It's how diverse is the feedstock, how diverse is the food you're feeding it, how diverse is your microbial community, how diverse the individual groups are, different fungi groups to each other and different bacteria groups to each other, and the ratios between each other all makes a difference as to how the system works.
So there's a good follow-up question also from Martin on that. So he's asking, we just use one generic inoculant that we've created in currently in a woodland in Wales. And he's saying, well, how do you know that, given that there's all sorts of different soil types and variations in nature, is one inoculant good for all? And how do you think about that?
Well, it's a really good question, and I'm going to dial Andy in a second here. So within what we found, there was 1,000 types of fungi, of which there was 380 species. That to us is as complex as we could get it using the system we had. And we tried making compost in different parts of the country. So we did some in Cumbria, some in Oxford, and some in Wales. And actually, we started to find that it wasn't just the feedstock or the technique. It was actually the location and humidity, moisture, and background kind of exposure to fungi and bacteria that was making a difference. So whilst we absolutely see the geographical differences from clays and chalks to peat, one of the things that's always we've talked about is most soils in the UK would have been a woodland at one point, and actually woodland-based microbes or bringing them back to life is of relevance. So whilst we're bringing in inoculation with fungi and bacteria, we're also bringing in organic matter, chitin, carbon, nitrogen, micro trace elements to feed the microbes, because there are microbes in the soils, but they're dormant, or they're not they're not doing very much, or they're so sparse they're not functioning. So we've definitely trialled from Cornwall to Sutherland and from Pembrokeshire to Norfolk. And I don't want to say all the time, but most of the time we absolutely see a response. And at this point in time, I don't think we know whether it's the microbes and, the 60 billion a hectare, or it's the nutrition and the chitin that's making the difference. But we know as a system, it's doing something. But in terms of that kind of locality, we took one of our mothers, which is essentially in a bulk bag, and we sent it to Andy's farm. He's put it in the woodland for a year. And then we take that back, we pellet it up and give him back essentially bespoke, local, microbial rich fungi inoculant for his farm. And I don't know if you want to kind of comment, Andy, on to how straightforward that was, or your motivations for doing it.
As to how straightforward it was, I'll probably be a little bit too blunt and just say we dropped it in some woodland and left it there for 12 months. So I think there was even an instruction to put some leaf litter in, which we probably ignored. But it comes back to this sort of thing of make it easy and people will do it, right? So it's not difficult. And I think you could probably get to the point of probably saying to people they could have a go at making their own.
Totally.
Put some compost of your own in a seed bag and stick it in some woodland for 12 months. Experiment. That is the key to all of this. Experiment and test. And then you start to learn what you've got, what you don't have, and what you need.
Just because I think we're coming up to the end, so any last questions, please do put them in the chat, but maybe I'll ask Andy and Jeremy both the same questions and you can fight over who goes first. What next for your farm and for fungi, and what are you hoping to see from Re-Genus or others in the future around the sort of getting biology back in the soil? And then also, if there was just one thing that people could take away from this webinar in terms of learning from your farm, what would you like them to know? So I don't know, Jeremy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, we've talked about this. Every farm has their own different context. So and we're all on different sort of in different places on this journey that we're on in introducing fungi and biology, etc., etc. So for us, and we spoke about it with we've tried Re-Genus products just going absolutely straight, neat, and that's all we've used. And this year we're going to experiment and try something different, because as Andrew said, it is just trial and error. It's experimenting. It's working with your soils, working with your farm, working with the inputs, in your system that works from both that sort of regenerative and financial context, basically. So we're just going to keep trialing different methods until we find one that works. And I mean, they're all working within certain parameters. We know that we're introducing biology. We know that extra fungi is there now, but now we want to see the knock-on effect of yield going in the right direction. So we've just got to fine-tune everything, and it is just a bit of this, a bit of that, see what works, see what doesn't work, and just keep experimenting. That's the only way that I see us moving forward, basically, is being brave.
Yes, yeah, and it's one of the things I was going to say. I mean, for a startup, and when you're really trying to change a system that's been in place for a long time, like brave people, brave customers who are willing to come on the journey are just like the absolute lifeblood. So we wouldn't be here without people like you guys.
Brave or daft, one of the.
Yeah, let's stick with brave. And is there one thing you'd like others to take away? Is it to be brave, or is there another message you'd like to give to finish?
Well, just get on with it and try it. And this is the same for people who are just thinking about transitioning to regenerative. Start small. Start with, like Daniel said, start with a tram line. You don't have to start with a field, but just start. It's like, when should you plant a tree? We should plant a tree yesterday or today. Whatever you do is just make the start. Don't keep thinking about it. Just do it.
Brilliant. Good message. Thanks, Jeremy. Andy, what are your answers to these two?
Yeah, so I think in terms of what we're looking at for next steps, we've done quite a lot of work over the last year in terms of setting up farm scale compost. That's our really big next step, and seeing how that goes this year, testing it and seeing how we can improve, which I'm sure you guys are going to be helping us quite a lot on in terms of just understanding. So that's a big one for me. I think in terms of, if I was wanting anybody to take anything away from what we've learned, it's exactly what Jeremy's just said, is do something. I think there's a lot of this that can scare people off a little bit and thinking that they have to do something huge at huge scale. And actually the opposite is true. You can learn an awful lot from just doing a tramline trial. And it's a great place to start. You know, it's small. Do it somewhere where someone can't see it. You know, just have a play, enjoy it, because it's fun. So
brilliant. Thanks, Andy. Any last takeaways from you, Dan or Sam?
I think from me, the one thing that I've observed through both forestry, horticulture and agriculture is just look at your soil and work out how alive it is. There is no point trying to fix a problem you don't understand. So, you know, if you've got no fungi, you know where to go. If you have, then you know where to go. And I think just, you know, for us, we've always done a field, a hedge and a woodland. And like the analogy for the bull, you know, you can absolutely see the difference between the two with what's under that microscope. So it's really inexpensive, it's really accessible, and it's I think there's way more value in that than nutrition analysis of your soil. It's just how alive is your soil, and it's something that farmers haven't typically done. So it's old technologies from the 1970s, but it's starting to get more accessible and is easier to understand. And I think we've been doing it for about 5 years now, and you can absolutely see a pattern. So for me, how alive is your soil?
Brilliant. Okay. Yes. Yeah. And we do. Anyone that's interested in taking some soil samples and doing microscopy, it's very inexpensive, and it just gives you that very good starting point to know where you are. Sam, anything from you?
I think it's all been said, to be honest. But thanks very much for joining us. And if you have any further questions or want to discuss anything, we are here to help.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Like
yeah,
said,
Sam...
we take the samples. We'll also do a report and explain, you know, what the findings are and where you sit on that kind of scale. There's been Nettie asked a question about grassland and what fungal to bacterial ratio you're aiming for, so we can help. It won't just be a load of numbers. It will be a bit of context and a phone call or whatnot to explain what's going on and how you can help kind of solve the problem.
Thanks, Sam. So we've got loads going on because I know it's coming up to spring sowing season. We've had trials going in the ground with the Tesco low carbon farm, with Branston's up in Lincoln. We've got organic wheat with Goodwood. We've got water companies funding trials, including with Jeremy. We've got hybrid systems where, as Dan said, we're sort of doing a weaning off of synthetics to sort of, you know, manage risk and manage yield over a 3-year period. We've got wine, we've got orchards, potatoes. There's loads going on, and what we're planning to do is, to anyone that's joined the webinar, we'll let you know about future webinars. We'll let you know as our trials data comes out. So and please feel free to get in touch with us if there's anything that's sort of sparked your interest whilst we've been talking. And we'll send out the sort of Q&A and the recording. So being a young startup, anyone that you think might be interested in this, please do spread the word, and we really, really appreciate your time this morning. So just to finish off, a huge thanks to Jeremy and Andy, not just for being on the call, but for putting up with us for the last couple of years and being brave and doing the trials with us, because it means a huge amount to help us to try and change this very important system. Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.